I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell, and I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. In this video, I'm continuing my lecture series into race and ethnicity in America. This is going to be section 1.3 of my notes on page 10. As you know, you can click the link in the description field. It'll take you to the PDF. Just download the PDF, use it to supplement your reading, and with that, let's begin with section 1.3. Alright, so this is race and ethnicity. Race in America. And this is section 1.3. Okay, again, page 10. So, the emergence of modern racism and the aesthetical response. And as we said before, the aesthetical response pertains to the classical revivalists, right? The classical nuanced appreciation, or overvaluation, if you will, of the primarily ancient Greek conception of beauty, the physiological way in which antiquity defined beauty, sort of the look of beauty. And the attempt within West is to articulate how those biases, how that biased interpretation of, really preferential, subjectively preferential interpretation of beauty affected the world, if you will. So what we're going to do is we're going to look into some of the aesthetical responses and how those factored into our contemporary understanding of modern racism. So first bit, Colonel West is actually identifying and justifying the preconditions for physiological normalcy. And the idea of physiology, obviously, is a body, a physical basis. Normalcy pertains to norms. So the idea is to create a norm out of a predefined, preselected physiological type, which would serve as the exemplar for what one ought to aspire to, right? This is the body that one ought to have. From that, from that assumption, you can make deviations from that norm, right? Less close, the furthest away, and such. This sort of rather antiquated, to be honest with you, this rather bizarre approach to demarcating human physiology in terms of best, better, worst, and so on, is a consequence of this emphasis that's placed on the subjective preferences of an ancient society. And the idea is to investigate why and how this has affected contemporary race relations. And it should be obvious, right? The less close you are, physiologically speaking, to mirroring or emulating the physiological type, the more dehumanized you are. Oh, your nose is too large, so you must be a thief, or your nose is too broad, so you must be a baboon or an ape. Your brow is too big, so you don't have the intellectual capacity, or your brow is too small, and so on and so forth. This becomes ad hoc. But the attempt is to use what will obviously become a pseudoscientific justification for exclusion. And it's to justify the exclusion of some community of people as a consequence of their difference. And their difference is the difference from this pre-established norm. So, the first stage of emergence, modern racism, bottom of page 10. West's normativized gaze, the following. West's normativized gaze, an ideal from which the order to compare observations, right? Which is obvious, right? If it's a normativized gaze, what is this normativized gaze? It's an ideal from which we can make comparison and contrast. So here is a condition. In terms of condition, we established this condition for all comparative relationships. Anything similar to it is more like it and thus gets any benefits that it, this physiological type, warrants. Anything away from it, any physiological type too far away from it, serves as a justification for exclusion. And this justification for exclusion is going to be very real. Right? It's a justification of exclusion for rights. It's a justification of exclusion for educational opportunities. It's a justification for moral exclusion, right? We don't have to be held morally accountable for the indifference and the subjugation, for the punishment, for the indifference, for the apathetic worldview, because your nose is 2 centimeters too broad, or because your forehead is 2 centimeters too wide. So the implications of this are severe. despite the fact that this normativized gaze is itself aesthetical, right? It is wholly subjective as a consequence, right? It is subjectively defined. The implications are clearly objective. So we have a subjective criteria that have objective, real-world, collective grouping implications. And the question is, how ought we to function as a people, as a marginalized group, if it's the case that the objective restraints and systems of oppression in place to keep us marginalized are themselves based on subjective criteria? If they're based on subjective criteria, then it's whim, right? Then the exclusion and the marginalization of a people is a consequence of whim. Oh, well, no, you know, now the nose isn't that serious, it's really eye color. Oh, it's not really eye color, it's skin color. Oh, it's not really skin color, it's some other thing, it's jawline, it's this. The idea is you're always in a position as a marginalized group to be disenfranchised as a consequence of the subjective whim of others. And that cannot be allowed to function, and this is where we find ourselves in modern racism. Obviously, the implications of the aesthetical sensibility of a community who wants to exclude those who don't mimic that sensibility is about as bizarre and as arbitrary as things can be. But it is unfortunately a fact of our existence, right? It is unfortunately a fact of our existence. The aesthetical tastes, subjective tastes of people influence the objective reality of people. And that's very powerful. This obviously goes beyond race, clearly. You think about any number of eating disorders, body dysmorphic disorders. It's really a subjective interpretation. But that subjective interpretation, it might seem like I've leapt here. I made quite a bit of a leap, but I haven't, right? The fundamental conceptual template is the same. And the fundamental conceptual template is an attempt to create a subjective taste as norm, as this normativized gaze. That subjective taste then becomes normativized, generalized, and everyone aspires to conform to that subjective taste. The problem is the conformity to that taste is itself objective, but the positing of the taste is itself subjective. So you have collective objective mobilization around a subjective whim, right? Which becomes, and I might have, sorry, that might not be too much ghetto philosophy there. So let me pause for a second to sort of bring that back. You have what we do is we posit, right? SUBJ, right? We posit a subjective criteria of any kind, right? In terms of race and race discourse today, what we're discussing in this section is the physiological look, the aesthetical look of the body, the hair, the eye color, the nose length, and such. But we recognize that it's subjectively posited, right? Insofar as it's subjectively posited, it is a condition of whim, right? It can be easily changed. This subjective state of affairs then creates a condition in which, so we'll just call this state of affairs X, creates a state of affairs in which individuals are collectively mobilized mobilized towards this subjective state of affairs. The collective mobilization, however, is not subjective. The collective mobilization is in fact objective. This collective mobilization to be like the other is also contrasted with an also objective system, social system of exclusions for those who cannot conform, right? So then also we have an objective system of exclusion. And it's a social system, SYS, system of EXCL. Right? So we also have an objective, so think about what happened. All I had to do was to posit a subjective criteria based on whim that will create a condition for what you could call enforced assimilation. You have to look like me in order to get the benefits that I have. You have to have the same color hair as me. You have to have the same texture of skin and the look and blah, blah, blah. So people are objectively now, not subjectively, going to mobilize so that they reap the benefits of this physiological benefit, looking like the other, right? Looking like the dominant group, looking like the hegemonic class. So insofar as you aspire to look like the hegemonic class, you are objectively changing aspects about your life to be like others, right? So you dye your hair color, you do other types of things, you bleach your skin, you do stuff with your face and your teeth and your body and so on and so forth, right? So this subjective criteria now creates a real-world objective mobilization to be like. But also for those who just can't be like, you're too dark, your hair's too coarse, your eyes just aren't going to be blue, what ends up happening for these individuals, it's a consequence. The only thing that can happen is that they're going to be objectively excluded. There's going to be a situation in which we create, not we specifically, but there is a condition in which criteria are created to exclude them. Let me just look for one quick second, sorry. That's connected. Shouldn't do. There's going to be an objective criteria in which systems are created to exclude. So you think about the apartheid system, right? The apartheid system would go here. It is an objective social system of exclusion. The social system of exclusion that is operationally functional in an apartheid system is one based on the whim and the subjective aesthetical sensibilities of the hegemonic class, right? So the aesthetical sensibilities of the hegemonic class, subjectively posited, creates the condition for mobilization objectively, but also objective exclusion, right? And that's where we unfortunately are at, right? That's where we're at. So that should be clear. Number 2, top of page 11. These norms, should be N, and aesthetic beauty were consciously projected and promoted as the ideal or standard against which to measure other peoples and cultures. And I just sort of gave you a deconstruction of that. It's very important. It's very powerful. The idea is we need to always be cognizant and aware of those subjective criteria that influence us. Is this influence that I'm experiencing now subjective or objective? Is it something real in the world? Is it physical pain? Is it a physical discomfort? Is it something I can see? Is it something that I can hear? Is it something that I can taste? If it is physical, if it is objective, if it is quantifiable, well, you need to be able to access those resources, hopefully in the government that you live, that are intact to protect you. You say, hey, you know, I'm experiencing problems here. Can you help? I'm experiencing physical problems here. I need assistance. Let's mobilize around that. It's another thing to say that there is the presentation of beauty. There is the presentation of the proper person and their look, or the proper way in which etiquette influences our social interaction, or the proper manner in which you should or should not speak, and how how you should dress, and how you should stand, and where you should sit, and what people you should associate with, what music you should listen to or not to, books you should read or not read. All of these other things are wholly subjective. The unfortunate fact is we put so much emphasis, collectively, globally, in any culture, East or West, on the subjective criteria of others. Right? If it's not physically affecting you, right? If it's not physically, immediately affecting your well-being, and it is posited as a subjective criteria, it's not to say that these subjective criteria don't influence us, right? I will never be able to look like Ken Barbie, no matter what I do. My skin is not that color, my hair is not that color, my eyes will never be that color. Any aspiration on my part to look like Ken Barbie is denialist of self. It denies me for other. It denies me as excluded, marginalized for the rather perverse aspiration to be like the very thing that I cannot be like. It's to be like the not me. I want to be not me. And the idea of the aspiration to be not me is itself self-denial, right? It's the foundation for self-denial. And that, unfortunately, becomes the standard with which a lot of marginalized communities aspire. They aspire not to be themselves, rather than taking affirmation and pride in self. Not pride in, I have to be careful how I do this because I don't want this to go sort of Nietzschean per se or Arendian, but a good healthy dose of self-worth, a healthy respect for the criteria and the conditions demographically, intellectually, emotionally, financially, that allows an individual to exercise will in the world. And to take pride in that, not to deny that. Unfortunately, a lot of marginalized community, based on inferiority complexing and such, they feel debased, they don't feel up to par. So in order to satisfy that subjective void, they aspire to be more like the hegemonic class, whatever that class might be, and we know the hegemonic class changes as well, so it's not just white people, right? I want to take this outside of just black-white relations, it's a little cliche, It's whoever the hegemonic ruling class is. Hegemonic class becomes Hispanic, if it becomes Asian, if it becomes black, if it becomes whatever, that hegemonic class then exercises the same functional control. So it's not about white people, it's about who's ever in control of the narrative, these subjective narratives about aesthetics and such. And you better believe that black people are participating in the construction of these narratives. Don't think that the only people, like the man, is in a room creating this narrative. The man is black people, white people. Hegemonic class itself constructs a narrative. What's interesting about that is the construction of the narrative might not always accord with the very individuals in charge of constructing the narrative. It's taking it a lot deeper, and I'll leave it at that level. So number 3, here's a direct quote from West again. What is distinctive about the role of classical aesthetics and cultural aesthetics is that they provide an acceptable authority for the idea of white supremacy, right? These aesthetical sensibilities. I'm not referencing hegemonic class. I'm not referencing the influence of media and propaganda. What I'm referencing are my own cultural tastes, my own cultural practices, my familial affiliations. Right? I see this particular thing and I think that that's beauty. I think that looks pretty. You can't tell me that that my tastes are wrong. No, this is a way that I see the world. I actually think that that's beautiful. Well, the question isn't so much about whether or not you believe something, an individual believes something to be beautiful or not, because we can't deny the epistemological tastes, the knowledge of my taste. The epistemological taste of an individual is unique and specific to the individual. It's undeniable. You say you like it, you like it. The question isn't so much, this is like the scene in Devil Wears Prada, where they talk about the blue dress, and she says, I like the blue dress. The higher question isn't so much, do you or do you not like the blue dress? It is, what were the social conditions that arose for you to like the blue dress? That's the deeper point. The deeper point is that, as they said in Devil Wears Prada, I sat in the boardroom 3 seasons ago before you even had a notion of that blue dress, and I constructed the condition for you to like the blue dress in the first place. So don't tell me that you like the blue dress, because you are in a condition in which, of course you like the blue dress, because I created the condition for you to like it. The only reason I'm saying any of this is because it's already in a movie. It's rather cliche. It's passé at this point. But the point is, yes, of course your cultural sensibilities, I don't need to make these grand appeals, right? As he says, right? What is distinctive about the role of classical aesthetics and cultural aesthetics is that they provide an acceptable authority. This authority now that you understand the dress argument, let's take it to the idea of physiological normalcy with respect to Anglo-Saxon physiology as typified. Not even just average everyday sort of Anglo-Saxon. There is a very specific sort of recessive gene characteristic. That's obviously the recessiveness of the gene makes it rarity, just like a capitalist approach is prized, it's valued because of its rarity. So, to my knowledge, I think both blue eyes and blonde hair are recessive traits, which makes it that much more rare, more scarce. So if you have both, it's tremendously scarce. The scarcity valuation is placed on scarcity. Blonde hair, blue eyes, being tall, being muscular, being agile, being fit, being healthy, more emphasis is placed on that. That becomes the norm. It's a norm because it's rare. If it was common, it wouldn't be normativized. That's the whole point of having a norm. The whole point of having a norm is to establish an aspiration for, via social conduits of assimilation, social conduits in terms of systemic collective control and such, things that I'm not going to necessarily get into here, other authors have. But the rarity is specifically the reason why it's been normativized. Blonde hair, blue eyes, that is. So in terms of blonde hair, blue eyes being normativized now, and you ask John or Jane Doe on the street and you say, hey, do you prefer brunettes or blondes? I'm being vulgar here for a second. And you take a poll. I would imagine it's 50-50. But let's say you meet one John and you say, hey John, blonde or blue? Blonde hair, blue eyes, or brunette? You say blonde hair, blue eyes. You say, are you sure you really like it? He says, yeah, I mean, I do like it. I have physiological responses to seeing that image type. I know I like it. I'm attracted to that. These are the people I associate with. Here are the girls I've dated. No one's, again, denying that he doesn't have an aesthetical taste for that physiological look. What's being stated is that his tastes for that physiological look was itself constructed so that he would have the opportunity to have that aesthetical sensibility. That's what's being stated here. So that our cultural and our familial sensibilities are themselves socially constructed, and according to West, this social construction is one in which it emphasizes and it prioritizes us, collectively speaking, to want to, willingly want to, via our own volition, want to associate with those aesthetical criteria that reinforce white Anglo-Saxon physiology. Blonde hair, blue eyes, pale skin, da 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 da. So that should be clear, right? For the idea of white supremacy, he takes it further with white supremacy, which I'll explain in a little bit, was closely linked with the major authority of truth and knowledge, namely the institutions of science. So he does two things. The more difficult aspect was the stuff that I just explained. I think that was the more conceptually difficult stuff to explain. Not to say that he didn't explain it here, but I didn't find it in the text. The easier part is just to recognize that white supremacy then becomes, it has to follow. If the majority of the culture looks at this particular aesthetical type as being beautiful, and all of the benefits, we live in a capitalist society in the West, right? All of the benefits associated with beauty are important. Don't think that beauty isn't important. It's probably one of the most important commodities in the West. And obviously I'm giving this lecture in accordance with the West. Not to say that it's not important in the East as well, but in the West, beauty is right up there with money and intelligence. It's probably on par with money and intelligence. So in terms of beauty then, the aesthetical ability for the collective community, nationally or internationally, to say that we value this look means that you have faith in those who speak with that look. You believe people who have that look. You trust people who have that look. You hold people who have that look as being morally superior. And thus, the idea of white superiority isn't necessarily inherent within just being white. It's absolutely, it's categorically false. It's not just being white that an individual becomes, quote unquote, benefited by white superiority. White superiority is a consequence of, at least in part, in this section, the aesthetical emphasis that's placed on these really recessive traits, which are almost uniquely ascribed to, not necessarily, but almost uniquely ascribed to white people. We create then social structures that reinforce and prioritize, reinforce benefits hierarchically for those who look like that. This is why someone might want to dye their hair blonde, or someone might want to change their eye color blue. We recognize that this is completely fine, and you know, I'm not going to get into the debate. Should you dye your hair or not? I don't care. I think this is, you should be able to do whatever you want to do, right? You want to dye your hair, dye your hair. I don't care. You want to change your eye color, change your eye color. I don't care. But the idea is we need to recognize why that norm is in place in the first place. That norm is in place in the first place to create a condition to demarcate similarity from difference. That similarity from difference benefits those who are similar and excludes those, to various degrees, of those who are different. For those who benefit from similarity, it incentivizes greater assimilation. For those who have a detrimental or an exclusionary relationship to this norm, the normative gaze that is, according to West, they have a worse time because I'll never look like that dude. So the inferiority complex sets in, the dehumanization sets in, and individuals of that community, many, far too often, end up buying into the counter-narrative, which is, I'm not beautiful, I'm not smart, I don't look good, you shouldn't trust me, I could be a threat. Why? Because my hair is kinky, because my skin's really black, because my nose is really broad, or my nose is really big, or my eyes are really slanted. You know, all of these, it is a tragedy that I'm even having in 2014 to have to give this lecture, but it's still operationally functional. And the argument is it might forever be operationally functional. The hegemonic class will certainly change over time, that's a fact. But the operational structure will forever be what it is, right? So it's important to understand, that. So number 3, thus initial bias for the idea of white supremacy is to be found in the classificatory categories and the descriptive representational order imposing aims of natural history. So obviously science is used as justification, right? So you use a pseudoscientific appeal and you talk about skin color and you try somehow arbitrarily to associate skin color with intellectual ability. And then you talk about, we'll talk later in a second, right? As a matter of fact, let me not jump ahead because it's in the next section. So let's go to the next section because I'm going to talk about it now. The attempt to justify the pseudoscientific belief that there is an inherent superiority physiologically, intellectually, morally, socially to being white. So the second stage of the emergence of modern racism unfolds, number one, this is the middle of page 11, modern racism as a consequence of the rise of phrenology. And this is the reading of skulls, right? And the physiognomy, the reading of an individual's face. So phrenology and physiognomy were consequences of European value-laden character. Right? It is a value-laden character. We take an objective criteria, take an objective fact, X, and we ascribe subjective, and we ascribe V-A-L-U, and we ascribe subjective values to objective fact. Right? Here's an objective fact. It is that his skin is white, his hair is blonde, his eyes are blue, as an objective fact. We then ascribe subjective values to these objective facts. This whole process of ascription, you can consolidate all of this concept into one word, and the word is valuation. Now, I know valuation has a different name, a different significance, connotation in terms of business theory. This, in a sense, it's kind of like that. Right? You're making an approximation of, I wonder what this thing is worth. Right? So you're taking some existing fact and you're trying to make sense of the worth of some existing fact in terms of business and economic policy and blah, blah, blah. In terms of social practices, it's about the same thing. You're looking at a characteristic, right, black skin, and you're looking at, say, two black people. I do this in another lecture series I forget which lecture series it is. Maybe it was this. I did it. I had to be this. Where I was talking about the aesthetical distinctions, I hope I did it already, between being darker black and being lighter black. So that my son, I'm relatively brown. I'm not necessarily black. I'm not what we call in the African American community or black American communities red, really high, we call it high yellow. Don't ask me how these terms or concepts came about. Very bright, almost white-skinned black people. So I'm brown, obviously. I'm not black. I hate these terms. They sound so vulgar. But my son's at least, 5-6 shades lighter than I am. Because my wife is mixed as well. So my son is, and my daughter, but my son is a lot lighter than I am. The idea is that we would place, this is sick to even say this, but it's true, unfortunately. We would look at him and his potential as having a real high valuation because he really looks the part, right? He's obviously going to be smart. He's my kid. I've been training him to be smart. He's going to be tall. He's very charming. He's good looking. He's lighter than me. And he's lighter than me has significance, right? He's not darker than me because even if he looked and functioned and for all other purposes was exactly the same kid, him being darker than me could potentially be problematic. And you see this in modern racism within the black community. And there's a phenomenon within the black community, and I know this as a member of the black American community. There's a phenomenon in the black community where black women seek lighter black men. They don't want to date them, and they don't want to breed, if you will, with darker black men because then they're going to spoil the baby, right? So spoiling the baby is a consequence of, hey, black men, this is problematic. So for black guys, really dark black guys, it becomes problematic in terms of dating. Why? Because the idea is if I have a baby with you, my baby's probably going to be darker than me. Being darker than me has clear-cut social disadvantages, so that value has been placed on being really, really light. So light-skinned black men, not white men, but light-skinned black men, might have an overvaluation, right? the valuation that is ascribed by black women to light-skinned black men is so high that the demand for them is high, thus they have greater pickings, right? They can pick and choose. Well, since everybody's coming to me, for me to be dad, since everybody recognizes, and this is amazing because, you know, despite the fact that we are in a technologically advanced society, we cannot escape our biology. Our biology is always already seeking to maximize the greatest social benefit for breeding with the best potential candidate, some of which is subjectively determined, some of which is objectively determined. But since our society is constructed in a way where external objective criteria to almost no extent determines, you know, any trajectory for our life in terms of social mobility, upward mobility, all of these are subjective criteria. How you look, a lot of it plays into it, let's be honest. Of course it's about your brains, of course it's about things, but, you know, subjective criteria, I'd say, play 50% of the game. You're already 50% ahead of the game if you can breed with someone that can guarantee you the right color skin child. So that you'll have, this feels like a 1900, 1800 lecture I'm giving, you know, this is like 2 centuries ago. Hearing myself say this is absurd, but the truth is valuation plays a very, 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 very influential role in propagating this self-denial, this self-defeated sensibility within the population, collectively, of African and Black Americans in the U.S. So it's important to recognize that, yeah, it sounds hokey now to talk about phrenology and physiognomy. Oh yeah, I mean, that's obviously stupid. I mean, why would anybody care about the skull? This makes no sense. This is clearly fallacious. But think about the social practices that we're doing now in 2014. Have we really evolved that much? No, what we've done is we've undervalued what we used to overvalue, and we've created a new valuation system, right? Where we have subjectively valued the objective fact of there being some benefit, some social benefit, and there is social benefit, to being lighter skinned. Thus, black women who are seeking to date very light black-skinned black men recognize that the consequence of their date resulting in marriage and kinship and children could benefit their kids. So being light-skinned could potentially be very, very good for black men. And this oscillates every now and then, right? Sometimes you have the value system set in place, then it's not, then it's black, then it's red, then it's whatever. So for Casper, a lot of words, and I probably pronounced that wrong, taxonomy and theories of noses placed in this thoroughly bizarre link, right? So basically what this link, and I thought I linked to, maybe I did link to, maybe I didn't. Maybe it is a link, but I thought I linked to that scene in Django where Leonardo DiCaprio does this speech about Uncle Ben, right? And he looks at Uncle Ben's skull and he goes, "Look at Uncle Ben's skull. His skull has these 3, divots here, and it's a consequence of this that he's so docile and subordinate. He won't fight. He won't stand up for himself, and blah blah blah." And he uses this pseudoscientific appeal as a justification for the moral and social exclusion of African Americans. It's because of his ability, even fallaciously, since we know it's fallacious, but it's because of his fallacious ability to point to some objective criteria that ability to point to some objective criteria legitimizes the subjective, whimsical belief that you and I aren't one and the same people. Okay, the link takes you to a description of, and you know what I'm going to do in other series is I'm going to put the word link after the fact so I know that this is a link and not just underline, because I underline a lot, but I'll put link next to it so that I know, oh, this is a link when I'm presenting. So in terms of this link, it's a bizarre link, right? The link takes you to what used to be an authoritative reference that spoke to the legitimacy of both phrenology and physiognomy. So the length of the nose had to be this long, and if it was any longer, then you're moving into sort of abnormalities of a nose, right? And these abnormalities weren't just physiological abnormalities that had impediments for the individual. These were physiological quote-unquote abnormalities that led to social perversions, right? This person might be inclined to be more threatening or more ominous of a person. This person might be inclined to being a cheater or a thief. This person might be inclined to being licentious or hypersexual. It's a consequence of these physical measurements that we can look at social deviance, unless we legitimize our biases for social deviance by appeal to, obviously, pseudoscientific justifications. Okay, so number two, some key assumptions. Racial variations are always degenerate ones from the ideal state, right? They're always a degenerate. They're always a perversion, right? They're a step outside. They are one increment of deviation away from where you need to be. So that there is an attempt to approach, but even if you approach, even if you can quote unquote, the word's passing in terms of African American historical tradition, even if you can quote unquote pass, passing being, I couldn't pass because I'm too dark, but you can imagine a very, very light-skinned black person, probably woman, who spoke like the hegemonic class speaks, could be given a pass, meaning she could be allowed to almost fully assimilate with the hegemonic class. She would be overvalued within the black community. She might gain infinite amount of preferential benefits within the hegemonic community, but at the end of the day, all things being equal, she could never be acknowledged as one of the members of the hegemonic class. She would never be white in this instance, right? So that, yes, there will be benefits, there will be overvaluations, yes, there will be subjective and objective criteria used to signify her existence as the prototypical existence for all of her representatives in the black community. But she would never be white, right? She would never be white, right? So we recognize this degeneration from an ideal state. This assumption establishes the needed biological hierarchy necessary for social demarcations along racial lines, and I spoke about that. So responses to modern slavery, power in defiance. So I want to read this section. It's a rather long quote. So let me read this section. This comes from Frantz Fanon, and Fanon is rather geniusly speaking. Now, Fanon, obviously, and West aren't speaking to each other. What I've done is, in reading West, I recognize that, as we've been talking about for the last 45 minutes or so, is the emphasis that West placed via the classical revival on aesthetical sensibilities, and specifically the aesthetical sensibilities of the hegemonic class. The aesthetical sensibilities of the hegemonic class have real-world implications. And the idea is for those, and I erased this, but for those systems, objective systems like apartheid, in place to oppress and exclude members who cannot pass, who cannot assimilate into the hegemonic class. Black folks in this context, if we're talking about black-white relations, but anybody of any racial, quote-unquote, racial group, we realize that I lose my culture, potentially. I don't want to look like myself. Black girls don't want to have kinky hair. Like, my daughter's a dread, right? And I'm not going to go into the personal narrative as to why she's a dread, but she's a dread. And her dreads are long, and her hair is super kinky, but she's beautiful. My little girl is money. She's beautiful. I got blessed with two really good kids. The idea is, you can imagine a young black girl looking in the mirror and seeing ugly in that mirror. My nose is too broad. I don't have blonde hair. And she might want to have blonde hair like all the princesses, right? Shout out to Disney for having a black princess. Shout out to Disney. Shout out to Mickey Mouse. Got to give a shout out to Mickey and Disney. That was stellar what you did. But now they have a black princess. When I came up, there was no black princess, right? So at least my little girl got, and she loves the black princess from Disney. Obviously, because I'm her dad, she has to love the black princess. She doesn't have a choice. She can like the others as well, but she really got to like the black princess. But the idea is now she has that role model, which is huge because Disney is everything. Disney's freaking everything. But you can imagine before my daughter, right? Young black girls of my generation, Gen Xers, man, you came up and I look in the mirror and all I see is ugly, right? I'm not pretty like the princesses. I don't look like anybody in power. I don't look like anybody of note. So when I look in the mirror, I see kinky hair, I see an afro, and I feel ugly. And the music that I listen to, they say that that's the worst music. That's not good music, and my music feels bad. And the stuff that I like aesthetically, the art that I embrace, it's terrible. And the way that I dance, it's licentious. It's too sexual. Everything that I do is wrong. It's funny, on a quick side note, I spoke with a professor who, I want to keep it sort of, I don't want to get specific, but I spoke with a professor who is a prominent dance instructor, and she and I were communicating back and forth for a while, and I told her I really respect what you're doing in terms of dance. However, I think you're playing it a little too safe. She's a very noteworthy sort of dance instructor from a well-named school, and I was like, you need to get into that really pagan, black, and I'm a Christian, right? But I believe this, irrespective of the fact that I'm a Christian, because I recognize that along with Christianity comes a lot of the sensibilities, aesthetical sensibilities associated with being Christian. And I want to deny that. All right, all right, faith, let's put that aside. This is not the context for faith. But that pagan, anti-Christian, black, what people would say evil, spiritual worship is something that I value. I do value that. And I'm not going to get into, oh, well, Jason, you're being a fake Christian. You're not really. That's not important, right? I do value that real primal, black, quote-unquote, dark, pagan, forest-based, earth-based, ritualistic dance, chanting. If you're white, it's Celtic. If you're black, it's real pagan, African. Aesthetical sensibilities. Why? Because it's not, precisely because it's not Christian. Precisely because it's not what we expect. And what Fanon does, and the genius of this passage, so all of this is to preface the genius of this passage, the absolute brilliance of this passage. And this is why I love my ability to give back doing these video lectures, because I think someone needs to be a defender of the dark. Someone needs to defend the abysmally black, pagan, even anti-Christian, even despite the fact that I have my own particular religious beliefs. Why? Why not? We're talking at the end of the day of subjective criteria. So if you want to do a real dark pagan dance in the forest nude with freaking fire everywhere, okay, maybe you ought not to do it. I'm not a reverend. I don't know if it's legit. But what I do recognize from a social practice is that since I can never be like you, since you've excluded me from social recognition, from moral recognition, since you've excluded me on the basis of my look, since you created pseudoscientific systems to legitimize and justify my perpetual marginalization and subjugation, then I'm going to put primacy and emphasis on everything that is so not you. I'm going to value everything that you don't value. If you hate it, I love it. If you're disgusted by it, I eat it. That's what I want to do. And oh my goodness, shout out to Fanon for being a freaking genius. So let's just read this. And I know this is contentious, right? It's when you get in academia, you got to have your head right, right? You have to really truly understand what a contradiction is. Walk a very fine line, and this is the line. So, this might be too far for most, but this is the type of stuff that I love. The first thing the native learns is to stay in his place, and not to go beyond certain limits. This is why the dreams of the natives are always of muscular prowess. And you can imagine, very muscular, angular, very black men jumping. You see their abs ripped up. You see their muscles. You see them just flexing. You see them grunting. You have, in a dark night, very dimly lit, and you have that really ominous feel, right? People would look at that as, oh my God, it's ominous. Not me. But people, oh my God, that's terrifying. And you have that, sort of that, I want to evoke that spirit, right? This is why the dreams of the native are always of muscular prowess. His dreams are of action and of aggression. This is a direct quote. I dream I am jumping, swimming, running, climbing. This is why any study of the colonial world should take into consideration the phenomena of dance and possession, of being possessed by that spirit. Now you gotta be careful. This ain't no Mickey Mouse now. Shout out to Mickey in the last section. This ain't just, that possession is a very real possession. To be like that. So you have to be careful. If you really are religious, you might not want to get into this realm. Right? If you really are truly devout Christian, maybe just take this with a grain of salt. But that possession, I don't think Fanon means it whimsically. And it doesn't necessarily have to be spooky, transcendental possession, because that might not even exist. Secularly, rationally, epistemologically, that possession is a oneness with. I am in the moment with this force, and I want to be absorbed by it. And that force is a force that isn't, because I've read Butler as well, right? That force isn't a force that isn't in existence purely in opposition to some standardized norm, because then it delimits and it undervalues it. It is. It just happens to be antithetical, but it is. It is a dominant, quote-unquote, aggressive, quote-unquote, dark force. And that force can be a good thing. It is a good thing. Let's continue to read. The natives' relaxation takes precisely the form of muscular orgy, in which the most acute aggressivity, the most impelling violence are canalized, transformed, and conjured away. The circle of dance is a permissive circle. So you see the dance. And I was talking to my fellow colleague about this. She's a dance professor at a huge school. And I told her, I was like, I don't think she liked it because she was a Christian. And I contextualized what I was saying. Obviously, this is probably a year or 2 years ago that we had this conversation. I've since lost touch with her. But, you know, I think when you talk to devout Christians, sometimes they get very, very defensive because of their religious beliefs. My personal belief is that whatever you believe in, that's your private life. Do what you want to do. But when you come into the public sphere, you have a social obligation that's global. So yeah, I mean, in other cultures, maybe you can't separate religion and practice. I was born and bred in good old USA, where I was indoctrinated to separate religion and practice, so I don't find it difficult at all. I recognize that this is a social advantage or disadvantage unique to the West, depending on how you look at it. Nevertheless, it's something that I operationally function well with. I can easily separate my work and my social role as professor from whatever religious beliefs that I have. And my religious beliefs are, just watch my video, what I believe. I believe in everything. I believe in everything. So what ends up happening? You end up having, I tell her, I say, you need to go back in terms of dance to that primal state of affair. Why? Because is it really that bad? And to push it a little further, this idea of Miley Cyrus with twerking, I think she got a bad rap. I think she got a bad rap. Oh, it's too licentious. It's too sexual. It's clearly carnal. Miley Cyrus is twerking. Now, I'm a young black man. I would lie to you to tell you that I've never watched a twerking video or booty shaking video, right? Clearly, I've watched twerking videos. Clearly, I've watched booty shaking videos. She's not that good. She's not that good. But she's also not that bad. Everybody jumps on Miley. How dare she do this? It's the worst thing possible. It is the most morally debased thing. At the end of the day, what did she do? She shook her butt for a few seconds, and the world stopped because she was shaking her butt. How's the sanctions with Iran going? Oh, what's going on with the security in the United States of America? Oh, what's going on with education and no, it's Miley Cyrus shook her butt on national television for about a minute and a half, and the world comes to an end. No, it is a rejection. It is a rejection. This social collective rejection of Miley Cyrus twerking, which is fine. I'm not saying that I'm an academic. We're talking very sort of heady, intellectual. I get why it should be rejected. Duh. I don't need anybody to tell me because of influencing children and blah, blah, blah. That's obvious. But she's not a child. She's an adult. And I'm an adult, and adult consumers looking at adults. She wants to shake her butt. Let her shake her butt. But the idea that she shouldn't be doing that, and I shouldn't be watching that, necessitates a norm that says she ought to be doing something else and I ought to be doing something else. The point of the matter is, if she's not breaking the law and I'm not breaking the law, why are we talking about Miley Cyrus shaking her ass? If Miley Cyrus as an adult woman wants to shake her ass and get paid hundreds of millions of dollars for shaking her ass, shout out to Miley Cyrus. So Miley Cyrus, you officially get a shout out from Dr. Campbell. Why? Because it is an attempt to reinforce these norms. And I understand exposure of this to kids, different story. But in terms of the narrative that says that's, I mean, booty shaking, twerking, whatever you want to call it, you can go back. Watch, I remember being a kid. I remember being real young, watching National Geographic and seeing beautiful black, angular, absolutely fit, super healthy black women dancing just like that and being mesmerized when I was a kid watching Nat Geo. I'll put it out there. I don't care. I have no shame. I watch Nat Geo and be like, oh my God, that's amazing, right? But you can imagine the missionaries coming and seeing that, and Goody Proctor coming, right, head to toe with a hood on and the feet covered and everything, and seeing that. And the first thing that you want to do is say that this is wrong. And the question is, why is it wrong? Because it doesn't accord with your aesthetical sensibilities for what a proper dance is? Why is it wrong? It's not a question that I can answer because I don't think it's wrong. The burden of proof is in the court of those people who say it's wrong. Tell me why it's wrong. And I don't think that it is. So, the circle now. The circle protects and permits. At certain times, men and women fling themselves with shakes of the head, bending of the spinal column, throwing of the whole body backwards, may be deciphered as huge efforts of the community to exercise itself. I love the word exorcism here because it is a play. Usually when you're exercising something, you are removing the demon out of the body so that the Christ head, or, there's really no other way to say it, right? So that Christ can fill the body. Again, I don't want this to be a religious lecture, but I have to do this. It's about aesthetics. So irrespective of the transcendental stuff, I'm not a reverend. I can't speak on that. I can speak on the aesthetical. Aesthetically speaking, you have an evil, malicious force inside of you. Exorcism is the attempt to get that force outside. Take what's internalized and externalize it, and thus free the person of that. In terms of Fanon here, he does not mean exorcism in that sense. Fanon is hugely, profoundly anti-Christian. And what Fanon wants to do is exorcise the black body of Christ. Get Christ out of me. I don't want Christ to be in me. Why? Because it's Christ inside of me. It's like the Oreo appeal, right? Black on the outside, white on the inside. If I'm black on the outside, white on the inside, then I am perpetually eroding at my self-identification. This is Fanon. Don't worry about what Dr. Campbell believes in. My personal religious practices or lack thereof, or my beliefs in everything or nothing, none of that matters. This is about Fanon in addressing via me, through me, Cornel West, Brother West's account of the aesthetical. So what I've done is I've associated and connected West with Fanon. So that's my contribution. But don't worry about what it is I believe. In terms of Fanon and what he believes and what he's arguing for, Fanon is saying we need that out of us, black people. Get it out of us. Because it is that white figurehead that we've internalized which perpetually erodes at any self-realization that we are ourselves muscular. We have that prowess. We have that dominance. We have that aggressive nature. That isn't to destroy, but that is always self-affirming. And we lose that edge by undermining the cultural practices that we hold dear. There's nothing wrong with shaking your ass if you want to shake your ass. Shake your ass. You want to shake your ass? Go shake your ass. This is America. You know what I'm saying? This is America. So if you want to shake your ass in America, go shake your ass. Seriously. I'm not trying to be vulgar here. I'm really not. But I want to make the point clear because I think sometimes we're always giving these really heady, pedantic, lectures on race, blah, blah, blah. And then when it comes to sensibilities concerning etiquette, oh no, you shouldn't be able to shake your ass. Ass shaking is definitely perverse. And you hear black people saying this, and you're like, well, don't you see how you are indirectly operationalizing a narrative that undermines our aesthetical sensibilities. There is no justification in telling someone that they can't. Now, if you're a minor, there are, whether it's legit or not, if there are social conditions in which you can shake your ass legally, then there are social conditions in which you can shake your ass legally. I don't want my kids to be looking at that, and I get it. But in terms of her ability to do that, no problem. In terms of the aesthetical repugnance or the aesthetical adoration for it, it's completely subjective. It's beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So to liberate itself, to explain itself, I just explained that, there are no limits inside the circle. I should have emphasized symbolic, because people read this and think Fanon's like too militant, but symbolic killings, fantastic rides, imagery, mass murder, all must be brought out. The evil humors are undimmed and flow away with a din as a molten lava. One step further and you are completely possessed. In fact, these are actual organized seances of possession and exorcisms. They include vampirism, possession by jinns, by zombies. Why is this good? It's good, not from a religious standpoint. I recognize that this is blasphemy in terms of many, many religious people's practices. I'm not talking about religion. In terms of aesthetics, it's important because it's another way to express yourselves. Why is it the case that every time the African goes to express him or herself, every time, every motion that they do, no matter how they do it, if it's just your body moving, it's bad, right? You can't do that. This act is bad. You ought not to do that. You can't be dominant. You just can't do it, right? I used to love hip-hop, man. I used to love hip-hop. I used to love, more than anything in the world, in a club. Shout out to my frat brothers, Phi Beta Sigma, Blue Phi all day. And our president, former president, Bill Clinton is frat, so represent to Bill Clinton, my fraternity brother as well. We go in the club as a Sigma. We'd be 40, 50, 60 brothers deep, all dressed in the same, in a circle. No women, nobody else except us. We're not looking to, and we just jump and chant for like 3 hours. Oh my goodness, you can't imagine the feel. You can't imagine the feel of that collective, organized gesticulation, right? That movement of the body. Now, this might not be acceptable for you, and if it's not, don't even approach this. But the idea is I have to be real when I give these lectures. I can't fake it. And part of being real is a recognition that you need to recognize that at the end of the day, it's people expressing themselves in the world. If it's not associated with a political agenda, if it's not associated with social control, if it's simply just people organizing themselves to entertain themselves, to create a condition of aesthetical community in which they can say, I like doing this, and there is no other political, religious ramifications, why are we judging? Why are we judging? There's no political implications of Miley Cyrus twerking. The social implications of Miley Cyrus twerking is a condition of parenting. It's not a condition of Miley Cyrus. It's a condition of what you allow your kids to watch. It's not the responsibility of marketers and Miley Cyrus to raise your kids. I'm all Charles Barkley on this level. I am not a role model. At the end of the day, if there aren't any social, political, religious implications, then allow these people to do what it is they do to entertain themselves. And this is what Fanon is saying. And don't demonize them. Don't dehumanize them when you see them moving their body or talking or expressing themselves in a way that you find offensive, right? Recognize that the offense is yours and it is, in fact, subjective. So I want to pause there before I end this last little bit because I'm at the hour mark now. And then I'll come back and end these last 3 bullet points to conclude section 1.3. Okay, so we're going to return to page 12. number 1 through 3 in the middle of the page, and then that will conclude section 1.3. So number 1, a, quote, European value-laden character functions to impart evaluative judgments demonizing the native oppressed populations on biological and, according to West, aesthetical grounds. So you see how I did West on aesthetics, went to Fanon to demonstrate aesthetics, now I'm back on West. So it's West, Fanon, West. But the idea is the collaboration between, quote unquote, the collaboration between West and Fanon via me in this analysis legitimizes the importance of aesthetical sensibilities. It legitimizes the application of, the application being the positing of aesthetical sensibilities in terms of its normativization as a conduit with which objective criteria are assessed. People are demonized and dehumanized because they like things they ought not to like. We're not talking about legality now. We're talking about taste. They like things that they ought not to like. They perform things they ought not to be doing, again, in terms of taste, not legality. And as such, you have always functioning, in addition to the legal system, a social system that enforces exclusionary practices for those individuals who refuse to conform. So, Miley Cyrus, if you shake your booty and society says there's no booty shaking, then you're penalized, right? We're going to say, oh, Miley Cyrus is a whore, Miley Cyrus is a bad influence, and look how she's fallen from grace, and blah, blah, blah. Granted, I think that balm will be soothed, or that those sort of vicious attacks will be balmed by, you know, a nice fat bank account. You can call me whatever you want. That bank account keeps getting fatter, so I'll be okay. And then those people who like Miley Cyrus, or they like the fact that she shakes her booty, well, you know, you ought not to be liking that. There's something perverse. There's something wrong with you because you're liking that. The idea is now we have two levels, right, of exclusion. You have obviously legal realm where you have to stay within the confines of the law, but now we have a fully functional social realm. This is not a religious realm. There is also a religious realm where I don't lecture on this at all because it would be wrong for me to lecture in terms of religion because I'm not ordained. So we have a religious realm that conditions our conduct. We have a social realm that conditions our conduct. We have a legal realm that conditions our conduct. And then, you know, operationally at its lowest part, this is where Aristotle bases all of this in, is the familial realm, right? They're familial expectations, which have quite a bit of emphasis on our role. So we got at least 4 levels of expectations for behavioral conformity. Everybody does. And you can see that it would be magnified if you are not already part of that hegemonic class. If you're not already part of that hegemonic class, then that social conformity is going to be extra hard because it isn't in my nature, it isn't in my nature to look at something like me, Jason Campbell, not metaphorically but my own nature to look at something like Miley Cyrus twerking and to say that that's wrong. I think that she is courageous to do it because she knows insofar as she's doing it, she's going to catch a lot of heat for it. But irrespective of that, her will is strong enough to do it, irrespective of the fact that people are going to say she's a whore, and she's this, and she's bad, and she's a bad influence, and it's, you know, she has no talent, and all of the crap that she's going to get. She had to have known, I know she had to have known, prior to doing it, that she would get sort of this social reprimand, and she did it anyway. So it might not be a trend that you might like to see, right? It probably isn't a trend that you want to see, but she is setting a trend for everyone. It's our responsibility to make sure that our children are protected from that. Or if they are exposed to it, that they understand the context. Children are a lot smarter than you think, that they understand this. No, this is a dance. This is a matter of aesthetics. It's a matter of taste. There isn't anything wrong in this dance. However, were you to dance like this in a club, it could send the wrong signal, and you could find yourself in precarious situations, so just make sure, you talk to your kids have a better understanding. That's our responsibility as parents, not her responsibility as an entertainer. Her responsibility as an entertainer is to entertain and to get people talking about her, and here it is, Dr. Jason J. Campbell, in one of my rather esoteric, heady lectures, talking about Miley Cyrus. So she's clearly doing something right. Right? So I don't think we should We should be so quick to judge. Number two, remember, racial variations are always degenerate ones from an ideal state. And I talked about this, right? They are a degeneration. I'm not sure if degeneration is a word, but they have degenerated, right? They've lost value. They've been depreciated, right? It's a diminution of value to say that you're black, right? To say that you're black and tatted, to say that you're black, tatted, and angular and muscular and aggressive, right? You're the threat. You're the reason why the boogeyman exists, right? People are in place, social functions are in place to keep people protected from you. But at the end of the day, we're talking about a look. We're talking about aesthetics, right? At the end of the day, since we're talking about aesthetics, at the end of the day, all of this nonsense boils down to taste. All of this boils down to taste. And there is something so subjectively preferential about positing one's own taste, and everybody else should have the same tastes, because whoever I am, it's never an I, it's always a collect, it's the hegemon. So it's we have ascribed social value to this particular aesthetical sensibility and all others are wrong. It's obscene. It's obscene. Now think of how obscene it is to talk about, and think of all the social backlash that Miley Cyrus has gotten and will continue to get because of her twerking. She violated a social norm. She's going to be, quote unquote, reprimanded socially. Her bank account's going to be fat, but she's going to be socially reprimanded for having done that. She's never going to be able to get rid of that. And we think some of the people won't care, but I empathize with her. I'm like, damn, that's not fair. Imagine now, she can go out and put a ballad CD for her next album. People love it. Great. I can never change the fact that I'm black. There's no balm, right? There's no fix for my blackness. I will always be, and I'm not that dark black, and I'm intellectual black, so I'm more hegemonic than most would understand. Of course, I recognize that. Imagine the real dark black guy, no education. You see him, not necessarily criminal, just no education, and you see him and you think to yourself, that's the threat. He's going to be socially reprimanded for his aesthetics, for his presentation for the performative act of just being alive in public. Miley Cyrus's performative act, twerking, social reparation. Black guy's performative act, living in public as black. Both socially reprimanded. One can be alleviated, one cannot. It's exactly the same aesthetical template. There is no difference whatsoever. And the point is, why are we allowing this to occur? It's clearly ridiculous. It's clearly contradictory. Right? It's clearly contradictory, and we should and we ought morally to change as a species. So this is me. Number 3, the act of possession, not supernatural transcendental possession, but possession of the degenerate aesthetic. I love that. That's what I was trying to replicate in the last, before I took the break, was the degenerate aesthetic. The degenerate aesthetic was getting heavily tatted. So you don't like tattoos? I'm going to get tattoos. I'm going to get tattoos all over my body. Why? Because I don't want to be part of your group. I don't want to be accepted by you, so I get tatted. Now, I've even removed, because now people are gauging their ears. I'm like, there's no way in hell. I'm old school now, right? I'm officially I'm not part of, there's aspects of new social trends among millennials and others. And it doesn't have to be the enormous gauged ears. It could be small gauge. I wouldn't even small gauge I wouldn't even pierce my ears. My ears aren't even pierced, and I would never pierce my ears. I did pierce my nose though. So, but the idea is, gauging your ear, that to me, I would personally never gauge my ear. I just can't understand it. I would never do it. Obviously, I recognize that gauging of ears is wedded to deep African tradition. I love the fact that I see white kids, white girls with their ears gauged. Why? Because it is, yet again, a means of social identification and a rejection of this overarching prevalence, normativized prevalence of a proper aesthetic, which is absurd by definition because aesthetics are themselves subjective, so there could never conceptually be a quote-unquote proper aesthetics or a proper aesthetical sensibility. So I see white kids walking around with their ears gauged, and I'm like, shout out to the white kids with their ears gauged. I would never personally do that, but they want to gauge their ears, knock yourself out. The attempt to say, oh, you ought not to gauge your ears because gauging your ears means something other than having your ears gauged is absurd. Gauging your ears means nothing other than your ears are gauged. That's all that means. It does not mean that you're deviant. It doesn't mean that you're hopped up on methamphetamines. It doesn't mean that you're a violent person or you're a degenerate or you have a criminal record. It just means that your ears are gauged. You might like it. You might not like it. Clearly, a business community is in the position to say that in terms of work, you can't come to work with your ears gauged, but that's a matter of business preference. There's no social significance or meaning outside of the fact that the ears are themselves gauged other than they are gauged. That's it. That's what I want people to see. The fact that people's tongues are pierced and all that other stuff. It's aesthetics. People will modify their bodies. People will modify their social groupings in ways in which other people are discomforted. As far as I'm concerned, if it's not a violation of legal code and there's no law saying you can't do it, why are we messing with people who want to live their lives and express their aesthetical taste in the ways that they see fit? If you want to do that for yourself and it doesn't violate any law, why are we concerned? If you have a response to that, it's your obligation to say why we ought to be concerned. It's your burden, the burden of proof is in your court, to say why and how we ought to regulate aesthetical sensibilities. And recognize that once you tread down that road, don't think that I forgot that this is about race. Then you're going to find yourself, from a conceptual standpoint, from a theoretical standpoint, having to justify exactly the same attempts to demonize, to dehumanize, to exclude others as a consequence of their aesthetical presentation. That is their blackness, right? Or any other minority group, right? When I come out of my house, I initiate with the opening of the door and the first step into the public a performative act. It's just like a dance. It's just like a speech. It's just like a monologue. Walking to my car, going to the grocery store is a performative public act. And what is on display when I enter the public sphere? My body, as aesthetically presented to the public. If you say that they can't gauge their ears because it has social significance, not because it's a violation of business practice, I'm talking about publicly now, and it's not illegal, then you're going to have to explain to me how you see me in the world when I leave my house, right? It becomes whimsical. It becomes whimsical. And any attempt to justify it becomes ad hoc and arbitrary, and thus it delegitimizes authority. As such, right? It is an inherent means of the delegitimization of authority if your authority is itself based in whim, right? This is what it is to be. This is what it is to be a despot, right? This is what it is to be in a position where at any time the rules of the game can change, and you could always be on the outside, and that's no one wants to be in that position. So this possession is a degenerate aesthetics, the idealization of the degenerate form. This is via Fanon, and if I were so inclined, I could write a whole book on this. I'm not so inclined because I like doing other types of sort of international macro level stuff. So I encourage others. This would make a phenomenal publication, right? The idealization of the degenerate aesthetic, right? Look at what we, Western, maybe even American, might look at cultural, social, body practices as being degenerate, quote unquote, when in fact they're only ever aesthetical presentations of body modification, of social practices and such, that do not have any ill intent, that don't have any intent other than the creation of an aesthetical sensibility. And look at the degenerate form, the degenerate aesthetical presentation, and ask ourselves why, challenge ourselves. So I'll give you a perfect example just so that it's clear. There's a type of body modification where, very intense, scary intense, where you remove the whole bottom part of it, like you keep the lip intact, but you gauge this piece underneath, right? All of this. You keep the lip intact, but all of this is gauged so that there's a hole here. And you can actually see the teeth when the mouth is closed. So my mouth could be closed like this. There's a hole. My lips are still intact, but you can see my teeth. Now, forget all the biological blah, 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 if it leads to sickness and stuff, let's assume that it doesn't, right? So that there aren't any health-based concerns for saying that we ought not to do this. Just imagine, just hypothetically, imagine that the person who has this done could live a well-functioning life, would not increase their likelihood of getting sick or what have you. And you just see it, you're like horrified, but like that's sort of intense. Like, I don't know if I like that. The question is why, and why not challenge yourself, right? And of course, I wouldn't want to see that, and I don't think that this should become a socially accepted practice. And I could argue for why I think it should not be a socially accepted practice. But the idea is to start thinking about it, right? Start thinking. Put yourself always in a position where you're thinking about aesthetical sensibility, your individual aesthetical sensibility, and ask yourself, why am I biased to like something and not another? Think about the example of The Devil Wears Prada, right? Think about the fact that your preferences are probably themselves a consequence of an already pre-orchestrated social endeavor to allow for your preference position. You have that preference because she chose 3 seasons ago that this blue would be the new thing, and you bought into it. And of course you like it. But don't think that your tastes are themselves completely independent to social influence. Your taste, as a matter of fact, is a product of social influence. It's just one, it's not the most significant either, which is why I'm presenting on it. But yeah, your tastes themselves, your personal tastes, your personal preferences are themselves a product of social construction, and thus we need to take note of that. So, idealization of the degenerate form cannot be incorporated into the epistemic articulation of what is known by the oppressor establishment. And all I'm saying here, sometimes I see myself write, and I'm like, you know what? I write really dense. I need to go check to see if my publications have been accepted, because it's like almost February, and I put my submissions out in like, I understand the process of peer review takes a while, but like 5 months, it's ridiculous. I mean, it's insane. So I need to put that on my things to do as well. The reason why I'm saying that is because I recognize when it says me, it reads really dense. It doesn't quite make a lot of sense, but it makes sense. It makes sense. What I'm saying here is the degenerate aesthetical form can never be accepted by the hegemonic ruling elite. And I don't mean ruling elite in some Illuminati BS. I'm part of the hegemonic ruling elite, right? Professors and engineers and police officers and judges and the president and the bankers and everybody, right? People who determine social order. So I don't mean it to be some boogeyman. It's regular people like me, right? My social function as a professor is in fact a propagation of established practices. It seeks to transform established practices, but it would be a lie to think that the intelligentsia and the intelligentsia class, as a class within society, isn't part of the hegemonic ruling camp. It absolutely is. Don't think of hegemonic ruling elite as being like all white people sitting around, men smoking cigarettes with stacks of money on a table. It's not that. It is not that. The man is me. The man is social practice. The man is the white guy. It's the woman CEO at Corporation X. It's that. It cannot be accepted by, as a total, generalized class, the hegemonic class. Maybe individuals within the hegemonic class will accept it. I obviously do. And even me, I recognize via Spivak, I'm marginalized from within the center. Some of you won't understand that. But the idea is, at the end of the day, no. We're standing by our social practices. This is what we consider beautiful, and this is what we consider not being beautiful. It doesn't have to just be race. It's better to be thin than it is to be fat. Forget healthy. Right? We aesthetically value, in terms of female body, in terms of male masculinity, we look at a very slender feminine frame and say, wow, she's pretty. And you look at exactly the same frame, you can imagine that, and I'm sure someone's done this study. Like you do CG, computer graphics, you get some designers. I've seen some amazing things that designers can do with Photoshop. You take a picture of a woman and you make either a woman that's naturally large or a woman that's naturally thin, slim, or maybe let's use the proper terms, I guess obese, and you use Photoshop to Photoshop her body. So you have the presentation of exactly the same woman, not two women, and you show the participant, figure A of the woman, and she's slender, and you show the participant figure B of exactly the same woman, but let's assume that the Photoshop's really good and she's bigger. You made her bigger or made her smaller, vice versa, what have you. It's probably going to be the case, if participants are being honest, that they're going to say, oh no, she's, A is prettier than B. Because it's all aesthetical. It's all aesthetical. Irrespective of all the biological blah, 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 blah. Just based on look alone. Not in terms of health, not in terms of wellness. Just in terms of look, that, if she's plump, she's big, she's ugly. But why is that the case, right? Why is it the case that we think that that's ugly? Why isn't it the case that a heavier set woman isn't pretty, right? I don't care, right? Socially constructed aesthetical sensibilities can be adopted and are often, almost frequently adopted by the mass, but that does in no sense mean that a larger woman isn't a beautiful woman. She could be very appealing, right? I want to talk sexual. I'm not talking about brains here, right? Just aesthetically, just aesthetically. No, I am sexually attracted to that type. And it is not in the norm. And I'm not saying I now. I'm not talking about me specifically. But the idea is, why not? Why not make room for those accommodations? Because the reason we have these preference positions to begin with, and these aesthetical biases to begin with, is a consequence of nothing other than individuals putting their own subjective preference on being slender and not being fat. And the more people that do that, being obese, and the more people that do that, and the more we see that replicated throughout the media, the more we believe that that's what I ought to like. And eventually it becomes the case that you don't even need to be told or programmed. You just end up liking that. Once you recognize this, you can say, no, I like both. You can be heavy, you can be thin, I don't care. I'm attracted to both. It's more about the person, it's more about the brain, it's more about blah, 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 what have you, what have you. It gets all romantical. It gets all romantical. But you get the idea. 3A, bottom of page 12. This act frees the individual from being pigeonholed, which complicates epistemic generalization of knowing who the individual is. And what this means is, I am now liberated, me, Jason, am liberated from being pigeonholed as, Jason, you can only like thin girls, right? No, you can also like obese girls. Right? No, I think, no, actually, I can not like girls at all and like obese guys. I can like whatever I want to like, right? I can be attracted to whatever I want to be attracted to. And in terms of aesthetical sensibility, it's that, right? It's an attempt to control collective behavior as a consequence of individual, personalized aesthetical sensibilities for which the individual, him or herself, isn't even cognitively aware of the fact that, as they said in Devil Wears Prada, my aesthetical sensibilities was influenced by and conditioned by a board meeting, was conditioned by some no-name professor at Institution X who wrote an article that nobody will ever read, that had that much influence to affect me. You think it doesn't happen, but as we saw in Devil Wears Prada, it absolutely does happen. It's not a question of if it happens. You just have to be aware of it, right, as an individual. Be aware, be cognizant of your sensibilities. Ask yourself, am I really averse to that? No, I actually like that. Well, let me explore that a little bit, provided it's not illegal. If it's not illegal, explore it. Explore it, see your taste, get a sense of what your sensibilities are, and then you'll sit back and be like, no, I do like this, or no, I really don't like that, or I'm trying to figure out whether or not I do or do not like that. I'm in a gray area right now. And on. Lastly then, number 3, page 12, to exercise oneself, then, is to valorize the degenerate aesthetic. Now, I'm not trying to brag, but that's a pretty freaking dope sentence that I wrote. I'm just saying. It's pretty freaking awesome. I don't understand my editors. That's like, I don't know, I'm gonna have to, which is why I'm probably gonna end up abandoning academia. It's too slow. Maybe I'll try my cards in the creative realm and go mess with the artists and the visionaries and do something aesthetical. I think I am, honestly, going to be drawn to that in the next few years, precisely because I'm tired at this point in my career, at this point in my sort of intellectual development, to try and justify what it is that I'm saying to people who should understand my justifications. And I'm not inclined to sort of fight the good fight so that people can understand. People can't understand. I'll go hang out with some creative folks, make a crap ton of money, and influence via aesthetics. But, you know, personally speaking, I think it's a dope sentence. Why? It's not just because I wrote it. It's not about me. It's about the fact of the matter. It's the synthesis of Fanon and West and what they said. It actually has nothing to do with me. It's a recognition that Fanon and West are speaking exactly the same language, and West is the Christian's Christian, and Fanon is the most anti-Christian. Who in the world would have thought that you could take West, who is a devout Christian, he said it multiple times, that he's devout, and shout out to Brother West for being just an awesome scholar. I've given him too many shout outs through this video lecture, but the whole lecture so far has been based on West's work. You guys know Joe. So shout out to West and his religious beliefs, but his religious beliefs helped him see the world in a particular way. I don't care if I believe his religious beliefs or not. Thank God he has those religious beliefs because he sees the world in a pretty interesting way. Fanon, on the other hand, completely rejects West's religion, and yet they see eye to eye on exactly the same point, right? So this sentence is the hybridization of both West's and Fanon's points, irrespective of the fact that they don't have the same religious beliefs. Why is that very important? Because it doesn't matter what you believe in. At the end of the day, it's about society, it's about the world. If your religious beliefs, or lack thereof, or atheism, or agnosticism, influence the way in which you see the world, and they don't lead to the marginalization and the justification for oppression and the justification for subjugation of other peoples, then more power to you. And thus, what do we have? We have a meeting ground with West and Fanon, as counterintuitive as it seems, and thus to exercise oneself then is to valorize the degenerate aesthetic. This was famously accomplished by James Brown's song, I'm Black and I'm Proud. And I want to read the footnote at the bottom of page 12. Beyond the discourse of violence and nonviolence is the needed discourse of the aesthetics of control and power. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a gem right there, right? Write about that. Write about how it's not something I'm interested in doing, but I think it needs to be done by other social theorists and other social scientists. If you're a dance major, write about how the industry of dance is controlled to mimic and valorize, I don't know that this is true, but let's just say it is, European over African dance. And if it's African dance, it has to be this type of dance, not that type of dance. And in terms of, I wish I had the link, I saw this amazing video, done by, I want to say it's Ukrainian, I think it was Ukrainian dancers, all women, and it was obviously a dance about rape. And they were slamming. I'm going to see if I can find this video and maybe modify the lecture series just to put the link in there. It was, as a matter of fact, I'm going to do that right now because it's the last thing, so it'll be fresh in my mind. They picked, I don't know if I could even find it. I don't know where, because I don't think, it is an amazing video. It is hard to watch. It is very difficult to watch. It's very, very explicit video. The dance company is genius. There's just 3 women and they're basically slapping their bodies all over it. They pick up, 2 women pick up another woman and slap her body on the floor, flip her over, and they're all completely nude. It's very, very, very visually explicit, but it's undeniably genius. Like, you cannot not watch the video. It's a matter of aesthetics. You might watch it and think it's repulsive, and I would understand why. You might watch it and think it's just too violent, and I would understand why. But you can't watch the video and then delegitimize the importance of the video. The video, and I know it's a better thing that I don't link it, because it's really graphic. It's a really graphic video. It's well done. It's all sort of constructed violence. It's not real violence, and that wasn't the word I was looking for. It wasn't constructed, but it's all sort of replicated violence. It's not real violence, but it's done so well that you buy into the narrative, and it's undeniable what the narrative is. The idea is we need to be able to allow for that in society. especially in the West. I understand it's going to be difficult in the East, right? I understand. So I'm not necessarily talking about in the East now. I wouldn't want to push that responsibility yet. In the West, definitely. We need to be able to allow for that. Because at the end of the day, it is an aesthetical presentation that violates purposefully norms of inclusion. It's in place to be excluded. The whole point of the video is to say, I don't want to watch that. But the idea is, you're saying you don't want to watch that is a denial of the social fact of rape. Right? It's a denial of the social fact that this occurs. So it proves the point. It's absolutely genius. It proves the point. It's something I don't want to talk about. It's something I don't want to see. Oh, black people being impoverished? Oh, black people being marginalized? Oh, black people really not having social systems to support them because of systematic, structured, organized, institutionalized racism? I don't want to hear that. That's the black card. I don't want to hear that. I'd rather not talk about that. Let's not talk about that. I'm colorblind. You know? The video proves the point, and it does it aesthetically, because we don't even want to see the aesthetical presentation because it legitimizes the social conditions that informed the aesthetical presentation in the first place. I don't want to hear about, I don't want to see any aspects of black marginalization represented in statistics. I don't want to hear it. Don't show me the numbers. I don't want to hear about social disadvantage. I don't want to hear about institutionalized oppression. I don't want to hear about educational segregation. I don't want to hear about any of that. As if the denial to listen, the denial to see, the denial to acknowledge created a condition in which that existence didn't exist. It already exists. It already exists. And aesthetics are a means of forcing us to see sometimes the things we don't want to see, forcing us to acknowledge sometimes the things we don't want to acknowledge about ourselves. Right? It's very important. So one last point, and I'll wrap up this section. Chomsky famously said, freedom of speech in the United States of America protects precisely the type of speech that you don't want to hear. And that's a good point. Similarly, very degenerate aesthetical presentations, booty shaking, chanting that you might not like, organization of collective people in pagan seances out in the middle of the bush naked, very degenerate aesthetical presentations are things you might not like, but it's precisely because we need socially to preserve and protect individuals' ability to express themselves, provided it doesn't break legal code, that the presentation of this aesthetic reminds us, it serves as a signal that someone in our national community takes this thing to be important. So important that they created a fair or a function, they created a ritual, they created a song or a dance around this, and we need to have a deeper understanding of what its implications are. What does it mean? Am I missing something here? Did I not see something? And that's what aesthetics does, right? And Plato talks about this throughout the Republic ad nauseum, but I really do believe that we need to take more time to listen to our poets, and to listen to our dancers, and to listen to our painters, and to listen to our musicians. It isn't just about our social scientists or our hard scientists. It's also about the enormous community of artisans that shape both our national and international order and what they have to say about society. So, with that, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. This concludes section 1.3. I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell. Have a good day.